Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming to tonight's webinar, Working in the Indo-Pacific. My name is Chase Hall, and I am a program officer of the National Security Education Program and a proud alumna of Boren. Welcome to the second webinar of this whole series, the National Security Strategy webinar series. Again, this is the second part of a four-part webinar series that will highlight careers in areas and regions highlighted in President Biden's national security strategy, featuring alumni from the Critical Language Scholarship Program and the Boren Awards. Before we get started, I've got a couple of housekeeping items that I'd just like to go through really quickly. To start, we have many wonderful alumni of these programs serving as panelists and moderators tonight, all of which work in some very interesting and exciting positions for interesting and exciting organizations. That being said, the views expressed by our guest speakers tonight are personal and do not necessarily reflect the views of any of their employers or any other organizations that they happen to be a part of. As a reminder, we will be sending out a quick little survey after this webinar for those interested in applying and for those that have previously participated in either program. We would very much appreciate it if you filled it out. It is very quick, I promise. So please give that some time if you can. For those of you who are interested in the Boren specifically or applying to the Boren specifically, NCEP has been assisting students study languages spoken in this region for a very long time. We have many students study Mandarin in Taiwan every year, a relatively new domestic Mandarin program held in Monterey, California, and an Indonesian flagship language initiative program that has been very successful. It has, in fact, been so successful that we've recently created two new flagship language initiative programs for Thai and Vietnamese, so please keep that in mind while making your applications. Lastly, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the NCEP service team, our technical experts over at IIE, the service team's director, Allison Patz, who is joining us here today, as well as the folk over at CLS, who we've been collaborating with to make this webinar series possible. A lot of work has gone into organizing this webinar, so I'd like to thank each and all of you who are here that helped make this happen. To kick the night off, I am pleased to introduce our first speakers for opening remarks. Mr. Scott Brokaw, who recently assumed duties as the Deputy Director of the Defense Language and National Security Education Office, and Kaveri Advani, a Program Officer with the USA Study Abroad, which is a part of the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Mr. Brokaw retired from the U.S. Army in 2008 after serving 20 years as a Chinese Mandarin cryptologic language analyst and served as the Director of LREC Capabilities and Readiness at Delencio. Ms. Advani oversees the Critical Language Scholarship Program. Mr. Brokaw, if you would be so kind as to start it off, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Chase. Like Chase mentioned, my name is Scott Brokaw. I just recently took over as the Deputy Director at the Defense Language and National Security Education Office. Very, very happy to be with you this evening, and I'd like to thank the alumni and the panelists and guests for joining us this evening. As was mentioned, this is the second session in a four-part series. The focus is on Indo-PACOM, and as Chase mentioned, I spent 20 years in the Army as a Mandarin Chinese linguist. Had the opportunity to travel a bit through the region, and so it's near and dear to my heart. Obviously, very strategically important region in the world. What is interesting here, the partnership here in putting this webinar on between the Departments of Defense and State, it gives us an opportunity to highlight the contributions that many of the alumni of the Boren and Critical Language Scholarship programs are making in this arena. Dr. Bagari, our director, spoke at the Boren Job Fair and seminar back in September, and she spoke about the importance of language skills and cultural knowledge. We can't overemphasize this enough. These skills that you all are bringing to the government, they're very, very expensive to develop and maintain. To be able to bring people into government service who already possess these skills and that type of knowledge cannot be overstated. Back in the early 90s, Senator Boren from Oklahoma was truly visionary in that he recognized that there was a dearth of these kind of skills throughout the government. And he recognized that in order for us to be global leaders, we needed to be able to communicate and understand the cultures of both our adversaries and our allies and partners. If you look at the last two versions of the national defense strategies, the previous version talked about the importance of strengthening alliances and partnerships. The most recent version of the national defense strategy basically says that we cannot accomplish our strategy, our strategic goals without our allies and partners. And so in order to be able to do that, we need to be able to communicate with them effectively, to understand the languages, to understand the cultures. And so to have people like yourselves enter government service and to make these contributions is critically important. So I'm very, very happy to be able to be here with you this evening, and I really look forward to the panel discussions. So thank you, Chase. Back over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Brokaw, for that. Next up, Ms. Kaveri Advani, if you will.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kaveri Advani, the Critical Language Scholarship or CLS Program Officer with the State Department's USA Study Abroad branch, and also a proud alumna of the BORN program. On behalf of the U.S. Department of State, I join my Department of Defense colleagues in welcoming you to the CLS BORN National Security Strategy webinar series. Our motivation for putting this webinar series together is providing you with insights into career pathways in areas and regions of the world that are critical to our nation's security, as outlined in President Biden's national security strategy. We feel the best way to do this is to shine light on CLS and BORN alumni who have forged successful careers in these fields. In today's session, we will hear from program alumni currently working on Indo-Pacific affairs in a variety of different capacities. We are profoundly grateful for these alumni for sharing their firsthand experiences and perspectives on this dynamic and ever-evolving region. There is no escaping the importance of the Indo-Pacific region, so anything that we can do to deepen our linguistic, cultural, and engagement with this region must be considered an essential pillar of support for our security and prosperity. Like BORN, the CLS program is proud to play a vital role in supporting the study of languages and cultures of the Indo-Pacific. Through our program, CLS provides students with the opportunity to immerse themselves in critical languages and cultures, preparing them for future careers in government, business, academia, and more. As we ready ourselves to hear from today's panel, I'd like to share a quote from Secretary of State Antony Blinken that underscores the importance of the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific is the world's most consequential region. It's home to half the world's population and is the world's fastest growing economic region. It is also a region of great strategic importance with major powers like China, India, and the United States vying for influence. The future of the Indo-Pacific will shape the global order for decades to come. That's why the United States is committed to working with our partners to build a free and open Indo-Pacific that is peaceful, prosperous, and secure. We hope that this series provides useful for all of your endeavors, present and future, in this dynamic and critical region. And we hope you'll join us in 2024 for the remaining two webinars, which will focus on Europe and Africa, respectively. Before we open the floor to our panelists, I'd like to share a few encouraging statistics about the CLS program. Our 2024 application recently closed, and we received over 5,000 applications from all 50 states, American Samoa, DC, Guam, and Puerto Rico. 51% of our applicants this year identified as students of color, a significant increase from previous years. 22% as first-generation college students and 30% as Pell eligible. Applicants represented 647 higher education institutions, including a record high 179 MSIs, 18 HBCUs, and 82 community colleges. These numbers reflect the growing diversity and competitiveness of the CLS program. We are committed to ensuring that CLS remains accessible to all qualified students, regardless of their background or financial circumstances. Thank you for joining us today. Sincere thanks as well to our BORN program colleagues at DoD and the BORN implementing team at IIE. We all look forward to a stimulating and informative discussion about working in the Indo-Pacific affairs. I am now going to turn it back to Chase Hall.
Thank you very much to Mr. Brokaw and Ms. Advani for those lovely words. I would now like to introduce our moderator for the evening. Ms. Nicole Smolinski is the Mekong Affairs Unit Chief in the Office of Multilateral Affairs in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Prior, Nicole was the Program Manager for Thailand and Malaysia at the International Republican Institute and a Fellow at the National Bureau of Asian Research. In 2015 through 2016, Nicole lived in Chiang Mai, Thailand as a BORN Fellowship recipient where she studied Thai language and was a researcher with the Migrant Assistant Program Foundation. Nicole, if you will.
Great. Thank you so much. It is always a really fun time when you can meet with fellow Borans and others working across the government. And what we want to do here today is provide insight into how we've been able to leverage both the hard and the soft skills that we learned abroad during our Boran year, and kind of contextualize what that might look like in a government career. And today I was really excited to learn that there's going to be a Thai flagship program as a Thai Boran. There's not too many of us out there, and it's really great to see a greater emphasis on Thailand as one of our treaty allies in the Indo-Pacific. Chase, should I go ahead and introduce the rest of our panelists, or would you like to go ahead and read their bios, and then we can kick off with some of our questions and framing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got 3 other wonderful panelists here. Let me just very quickly pull up their bios. There we go. Okay, so first up, we have Camille Bismonte. She is an international program specialist with the Commercial Law Development Program of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Prior to joining CLDP, Camille worked as an associate at the Global Strategic Advisory and Commercial Diplomacy firm Denton's Global Advisors, Albright Stonebridge Group's East Asian Pacific practice. Camille, if you'd like to say anything else about yourself before we move on to the next person.
Yeah, I'm just happy to say that I'm really excited to be able to speak today on such an important panel on a region that I care so much about. I'm a proud alumni of the Critical Language Scholarship Indonesian program in 2018 and the Boran Indonesian Flagship Language Initiative program in 2019. So it's been really great to see that this is being hosted by CLS and Boran.
Thank you very much. Our next panelist, JQ, is a defense economic analyst at the DoD, where he's been covering the East Asia region since 2019. As a defense economic analyst, JQ writes and briefs assessments on foreign defense economic trends and identifies opportunities to advance U.S. military interests. JQ? Oh, and also, as I remember, a dejected Patriots fan and proud owner of 3 electric scooters. So, JQ, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm originally from Boston, so following the Patriots' demise has been very disappointing for me, but it is what it is. You know, you got to give everyone else a chance. But yeah, a couple more remarks from me. Really passionate and happy about, and how Boran allowed me to get a career in national security. I'm Chinese American as well, so I was able to kind of learn from my cultural identity and kind of apply that to the work that I do. But I really feel that it's important to have, people who have been recently in the region to be able to pull from that experience, that cultural nuance, that language experience, and bring it into the government. So I'm fully on board with promoting this program as well as CLS, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Anytime, JQ. You have been wonderful to have at a couple of our different events. JQ is also one of our alumni ambassadors over here at Boran, and guest starred surprisingly at our last seminar. So thank you very much. We appreciate you hopping in there. Last but not least, we have Dakota Carey, who is a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub. Dakota is also a consultant at Krebs Stamos Group and previously was a research analyst at Georgetown University's Center for Security and Emerging Technology on the Cyber AI project. Dakota, if you have anything else to add.
Hey, all. Yeah, I wanted to start out the gate by appreciating the fact that CLS does focus on equity and inclusion in its applicant evaluation process. As somebody who was Pell eligible in undergrad, I sat through graduate classes in language with students who had been taking Mandarin since pre-K, and that just wasn't an option in the zip code that I grew up in. So I'm really glad to see the inclusion aspects that CLS promotes, and I'm happy to be on this panel.
All right, well, I'm very glad to have all of you here today. Thank you very much for joining us. Without further ado, I would like to pass the floor back to Nicole.
Great, thanks so much, Chase. So I'll just provide a couple of kind of framing remarks. We heard earlier from our 2 keynotes, the true importance of the Indo-Pacific region. It's a vast region, not planned. I'm in my deputy's office today, but that there is, just a picture behind me of, the huge real estate that this region covers. and you know, it's been described as from Hollywood to Bollywood. So that's a huge amount of space, a huge amount of cultures, a huge amount of languages that are all part of a region that grows increasingly more important, both in terms of US foreign policy, but in terms of the connections that are forged through trade, through culture, through sometimes defense cooperation, diplomacy, you name it. There's a government agency and really invested civil servants and foreign service officers and uniformed officers working day and night on these issues. So, you know, we all, or most of us, join the CLS or the Bourne program looking for a foot in the door for government service, trying to deepen engagement and knowledge in a region that we care deeply about. And so we want to give you a picture of what that might look like. You know, you can read all of the national security strategies, you can read the Indo-Pacific strategy, and there's definitely some key points that pop up. You know, our President Biden has said that the Indo-Pacific will be the epicenter of 21st century geopolitics. It's strategically important region. It's something that our allies and partners and friends are also increasingly veering their attention towards. We've also seen Indo-Pacific strategies from Canada, the UK, France, the EU, and of course, partners in the region. So what does that mean? How do we work? It really is a chorus of voices that we have worked together to identify shared priorities and shared goals of how we can work together, addressing a number of challenges. And so what that looks like for those of you that are either on your program or recently returned, it means that you have a very unique viewpoint of what those concerns and what those needs are. And so that's definitely something that you should highlight as a very unique skill that not every applicant will have. Not only can you speak the language, you have local insight, you have friends that you're going to and peers that you're going to grow up together and hopefully forge and continue those relationships. So, you know, identifying ways that we can work together, that's bread and butter of what I do here at the State Department, and I'm sure colleagues on the panel can echo as well. And then we also have an increase in some of the minilateral engagements in the region with things like the Quad or AUKUS or the trilateral work between Japan, ROK, and the United States. And so again, that regional knowledge, that deep expertise is so important when you're working together with multiple voices in the room that all have a shared vision, but oftentimes different perspectives on how to get there in the end. And so being able to be in the region, to have a deeper knowledge set, to be able to read documents or have conversations in the language of your partners is so vital and so important in making sure that the work that we do continues. And it's really those hard and soft skills where not only do you know the policy, but you know the culture and you know the history, and you're less likely to misstep on some key points that partners might pick up on. And also just broadening it out just a little bit. You know, today we're talking about the Indo-Pacific, but it's really important to remember that our world is so interconnected, and global actions and global events truly do have an impact, even when you're working on a different region. And so relying on the relationships that you might have through your broader Bourne and CLS cohorts that might focus on Russia or Ukraine or Israel and Palestine, that's also an important cohort to lean on and to gain their perspective as well, because it does affect our daily work and what we do since it is so interconnected. So that'll be enough from me. I'll turn it to our panelists. We've got a series of 3 questions that we have ahead of time, and then we want to turn the floor to the rest of you to ask questions that you might have about, you know, how does this look? What would it look like if I were to work on this issue, or how do you deal with different things? So to kick it off, wanting to underscore that as the nation's largest employer, it's really imperative that the United States government serves as a model for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, also known as DEIA, and that all employees are treated with dignity and respect. Further, by removing barriers to equal opportunity, we're better able to recruit and retain a talented workforce. We support these initiatives not only because they're the right thing to do, but studies have proven that diverse workforce makes better decisions, better business sense, encourages creativity, and really does lead to higher performing teams. So the first question I have for my panelists today is, could you please describe ways that you felt supported or seen DEIA principles in action at the team office or agency level? And I will go, and if we could have Camille, then JQ and Dakota present in that order, that would be great. Over to you, Camille.
Great. Well, thank you, Nicole, for that really important overview of the Indo-Pacific region. I guess one of the things I was thinking about when you were mentioning DIA is the CLS Spark program. It's been really such a joy to be able to have worked with the Critical Language Scholarship Program, especially as on a volunteer basis, I run a program called the Global Community College Transfers Program, and our aim is to close the knowledge gap for these kinds of global affairs opportunities. As all of you may know, especially in the scholarship space, a lot of these experiences abroad kind of build upon each other. And so being able to catch people early, especially in the community college space, is really important. And I think the work that CLS does, I remember a few years ago, I was checking the data that community college students tend to perform a little bit better during the application process. And that's mainly because of also their varied experiences. And so being able to catch that kind of early, or think about like kind of what kind of career do I want to have through these federal scholarships, is really important. So if you guys are alumni of this program, of these programs, then you've made the right step as far as thinking about this kind of in a more broad sense. As far as the Department of Commerce, we just released the Department of Commerce strategic plan for 2022 through 2025. And more recently, for our performance plan process, we've now decided to incorporate more DIA language starting the 2024 fiscal year. And while that is still in the implementation phase, I think it's really incredible that, oh, sorry, Nicole, if you wanted to talk, but I just think it's really incredible that we're starting to think a little bit more about DIA as part of our key performance indicators at work as well.
Thanks, Camille. Sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand. You'd think I'd know how to work a virtual panel after 2 years of a pandemic, but here we are. JQ, over to you.
Absolutely. No, I love this question. There's a lot. I'm really proud of our organization and the ability to kind of flex towards more of the DEIA initiatives. And there's still a lot more work to be done, but I really appreciate the grassroots initiatives that we have within the Department of Defense. You know, we just have a lot of passionate and, you know, well-meaning officers, employees who do a lot to really try to make people feel more included. So me personally, I'm a big participant and lead for one of our Asian American affinity groups. And to me, that's been really important, just, you know, given the geopolitical context of, you know, what we're working on right now. And for me, it's always been important as Chinese American to make sure that we categorize the malactors in an accurate fashion. You know, is it the government, is it the people? And especially going through COVID with a lot of the, you know, the hate that we've seen, it's really important to have a support group, allies, and strategic leadership just talking about it to make sure that, you know, your employees should feel safe. And then with our own grassroots organizations at our organization, we've been able to prioritize mentorship development, career development, coaching, shadowing opportunities to really uplift the underrepresented minorities, but then also to expand it out to everyone at the agency. So I recently was a part of a community-wide workshop where we kind of called in all of the affinity groups within the DoD to kind of talk about what ways should we work together to have you know, a unified vision. You know, we all have our different fights and priorities we want to work on. We just find a way to, you know, work together and have an aggregated community of all those leaders. So I've just been really proud of what we've been doing. And as a fairly, you know, younger analyst in the department, it's really given me hope and motivation to want to stay. And it's really similar to what my experience was in college, you know, finding a comfortable affinity group to kind of give me that support and then, you know, provide me the ability to seek other opportunities elsewhere and have that, you know, that top cover.
Thanks very much, JQ. Dakota, over to you.
Hey there. So my perspective is one that comes from dealing and working in the private sector and in academia, and as a white guy. And so what I would offer to you is that tech space and the tech policy space around China is still incredibly white. It lacks diversity in a number of ways. However, there are people and individuals who can hear people for the experts that they are, recognize that, value and promote it. And if you're in the position to help identify, promote, and listen to those people who are experts, it's you, the folks who have been in country, you need to fulfill that obligation and support those individuals, even in a workplace that does not actively reach out or have a mission-driven focus to support that. And I think that is one of the best things that we can do, particularly when we're in the private sector or even in government service, finding your advocates and following your blocks.
Great, appreciate that. Thanks, Dakota. I would encourage anybody to put any questions you have for our panelists in the Q&A box. Just a reminder, we're really looking forward to answering some of the questions from the audience. Until we open it up, I have another question for our panelists. So the Biden administration places a premium on strengthening relationships with our allies and partners and responsibly managing growing strategic competition in the region. Given this landscape, how do you prioritize strategic engagements and building positive progress in your chosen career field to support overall objectives? And I'm going to switch it up and have Dakota, Camille, and JQ answer in that order. So Dakota, over to you.
Yeah, I think that bringing the language and cultural expertise that you guys have picked up along the way in your programs to not only whatever analytical function that you may be performing or management function, but also in the ways that you are trying to carve out a lane for yourself in your career. As the apparatus shifts its focus rightly to the Indo-Pacific region, as does the private sector try to get a better understanding of what their exposure is to the region, how they can succeed, or where their pitfalls are. Being somebody who is culturally competent and informed is a huge, huge benefit in the application in the workspace. The ability to deliver nuanced analysis based on your experience in country, cultural understanding, language skills, the ability to communicate across those barriers for people who are not as well skilled is a huge differentiator. And so when you're thinking about the job functions that you want to perform, leaning into that expertise is not only an important way for you to differentiate yourself among applicants, it's also a really important way for you to make sure that the mission of the organization that you're applying for is approaching the goals of U.S. National Grant Strategy in a way that will be effective as informed by your expertise.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Camille?
Yeah, kind of on that note, I think being able to, my perspective as a Filipino American, especially as a first generation Filipino American, has been really interesting, especially being able and fulfilling to be able to work on a region that I care so much about on a personal and professional level. But to speak a little bit more about the work I currently do and how I think the Commercial Law Development Program or the U.S. Department of Commerce helps prioritize or move forward the administration's strategic objectives. Our moniker is improving the legal environment for business worldwide. And so really we help emerging economies, and mainly my portfolio is Southeast Asia, and more recently has expanded a little bit more to South Asia, which has been a learning curve. But being able to work on these regions and help address specifically the legal regulatory environments has been really interesting. Mainly we focus on providing technical assistance to the countries And that usually is in the form of workshops. So we host programs on international commercial arbitration and public-private partnerships. A lot of these programs are aimed towards being able to better the legal environment in these countries, and just provide countries the tools to be able to empower themselves economically, and these kinds of programs contributes to economic security, political security. And so despite being in the Department of Commerce, our office actually does fall in NCEP's category as a national security office, just because of the kind of work we do. So it's been really interesting to be based in DC while frequently traveling to the region, especially being able to see that intersection of policy and then implementation. And so when I think of like being able to prioritize the administration's objectives, I think it's really cool to be in such a unique space of being here and being there. And as Nicole knows, I travel quite a bit for this job. And so right before this, I was in Nepal, Laos, Bangladesh, and then more recently, Timor-Leste. And that, as you know, is a very far trip. So I think the Department of Commerce is doing really unique things through the Indo-Pacific through specifically my portfolio is the Infrastructure Transaction and Assistance Network, or ITAN. But that's enough for me. Nicole, back to you.
Thanks, Camille. And always good to meet up with Camille in the region when we happen to overlap, which is always fun to, kind of see it in action, how we're able to work together. JQ, over to you for the same question.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll speak personally what I've done to kind of give myself that trajectory to achieve those objectives, but then also generally on what one could do to prepare yourself. I think there's like 4 main points. And my colleagues here have talked about them a bit. Dakota mentioned that it's important to really leverage your culture and language expertise from going abroad, either through the BOR and through the CLS, or even if you just have an abroad program at your university. And then also being able to really understand what the national security framework is. And that's been mentioned by our keynote speakers, Nicole, as well. And then for me specifically, it's within the DoD's framework, which is the National Defense Strategy. So the NDS fights the NSS. And then third, I think it's really important to wherever you go in your job, it's really important to be a team player and make sure that you are integrated cross-functionally, like internally within your own organization, but then outwardly and, other agencies or other organizations. And I think like our foreign service colleagues, their models of working at embassies, you have to work with all these different organizations. You have to be on great working relationships with them. So be it commerce or be it, just the state officers, you always want to be able to communicate effectively, but then make sure that the mission is still at hand and you kind of get away from any of the nitty gritty differences between your agencies or organizations. Because I know everyone likes to complain internally about certain things and then they try to compare themselves one another to the others. And then the fourth point I'd like to make is just like wherever you are, just learn as much as possible. Learn, be it through mentorship, shadowing, or even just resources at your agency. So at the DoD, we have coaching, and I've tried to leverage that, and it's definitely been helpful. When I left, college, I didn't really understand either the function that I was doing or the culture of the DoD. I was an econ major, minored in Chinese, so I was anticipating a career in banking or consulting. So really being able to leverage those resources to understand how to interact with DoD specific people, understanding how that language is, the very process-oriented ways that the government works is important. So being able to learn as much as possible. And I'll go back to leveraging on being a team player. I think that is something that I've learned the most in my career. So I'm an analyst by trade. So I'm basically a researcher, right? So I read, I write, and I sometimes brief. But every now and then you'll have to integrate with other teams. And oftentimes through your only interaction with a colleague is through email chains. And it's really easy to kind of, read some of the wordings in a passive aggressive tone or get a little annoyed with the ways that people are writing. But it's important to set aside those differences to make sure that, we have this unified government effort for our security strategy or defense strategy, and being able to expose yourselves to these other organizations definitely allows for that ability to learn.
Great, appreciate that answer. And to use a phrase that my assistant secretary loves to use, I will foot stomp the importance of working across your own agency, working even within your own building, learning how the building works and what offices have equity, and building and collaborating with everybody is so important in the life of a civil servant or a government official. It truly is a team sport. And it's important to understand equities, share equities, and share credit and share success. Since at the end of the day, it really is the United States that we're all representing, not necessarily our individual agencies or offices. Last question from me, and then I see we have a lot of really great engagement from the audience. So the last question is, how have you incorporated language and cultural competencies gained during your CLS or BORN experience abroad into your current work supporting the national security strategy and or the Indo-Pacific strategy? So we will also switch it up again. So we'll have JQ, Dakota, and Camille. So JQ, over to you again.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Let me take a look at my notes real quick, make sure I touch all the points I want to get through. Oh, sorry, I think I muted myself. Can you hear me?
You can hear me. Yeah. Yep.
All right, perfect. So I've definitely been able to leverage my cultural and language skills from my BORN. So in 2018, I went to Beijing, China. I studied abroad for about 9 months at Beida. So there I was studying economics, and then I was also studying the language. I think it's really important to, soak yourself up into what's going on in the region. At that point, it was 2017, 2018, it was the trade war with the US, and I naively thought I was going to go over there and fix everything. Of course, that didn't happen. But while I was over there, I just really tried to understand what the youth were going through, like 5 years later, it's now 2023, about like learning about the demographics issues, learning about the struggles of like the little emperor syndrome, and being able to kind of take anecdotes from my experiences. So one of the experiences I really recall was one of my teachers. So she's married, she has one child, and she is the only child, and so is her husband. So they're both only children, and they have one child, but they both have stresses of taking care of both sets of parents. But since they have no other siblings to help them out, they're kind of stressed with, either their careers and then their kids, and how to find a way to really help out with their elders. And then they have this other pressure from, their elders, and they're talking about this very openly and very vulnerable about the issues that they're going through. And being able to kind of talk through that experience, and being able to talk to some of my colleagues about, the difficulties of the one-child policy and how much that has really affected personal lives, but then also the economy, and the personal anecdotes that people were able to share definitely allowed me to better understand the people and what was going on. So that's just like one of the examples that I have. But in terms of just language and looking at the news and looking at what people are prioritizing at the time was vitally important for what I would bring to the Department of Defense. So I'm very thankful that I was able to spend 9 months there. I was able to not only interact with faculty members, but then also the students at Peking University, and really understanding what their priorities were, what their vision was. So being able to not only separate out, public media, but then have like an on the ground perspective was really helpful for me, and really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my career.
Appreciate it. Thanks. That's really helpful advice for everyone on the line. Dakota, over to you.
Hey there. I would push folks to, if you intend to lean into your regional expertise, your language experience, et cetera, to only pursue jobs that leverage it explicitly, that state in the job description that you will be required to utilize that skill set in furtherance of XYZ, whatever it is that you're doing. Folks from my cohort went on to do very specific China-focused jobs. I myself, one of them, I leveraged language skills, 8 to 10 hours a week doing research at the low end to, more than 20 during intensive periods. And that was specifically because I sought out a job where I would be using that skill set. There were folks from my cohort who kept up with the language skills when they got back, had a tutor, they got a job that was Indo-Pacific but not in their language or area of focus where those skills are required. And while the cultural competency and understanding stays, the language drops off if folks are not diligent about that. And so if you are intent about using that aspect of your skill set, you either need to move into a job that explicitly says it's going to use it, or be willing, able to pay for and maintain the language skills via a tutor in furtherance of some job that will come after your first one.
Great, really good advice. And sadly, it does drop off quickly. So getting in that extra practice is always great. Camille, over to you.
Yeah, so I would like to say, first of all, that I can definitely owe my career to the critical language scholarship. Like JQ, I was also an econ major, and my idol at the time was my uncle, who was like a financial analyst of sorts somewhere in the Bay Area. And I was like, sure, that seems like a real job. And it is. But I was a Spanish minor at the time. I saw someone who was asking a question about if you're focusing on one region and you're thinking of maybe pivoting, let's say. So in my head, I was going to do Spanish. I was going to do Latin American economic development or something of the sort. And then I did the critical language scholarship, really as a mode of trying to find an affordable way to study abroad, I'll be honest. And then I was like, well, I'm a Filipino. There's only one Southeast Asian language in CLS. It's Indonesian, and it required no prior experience. So I was like, great. So I applied, and from the CLS, I had grown from literally not being able to speak at all. I think I knew how to say my name is and where is the bathroom. And then I moved up to, by the end of it, being able to talk to my host mom about like politics, which I thought was really interesting, because I'm like, wow, before this, we used to just do a lot of Pictionary and charades, and now look at us. After CLS, I went on to do the Boren in 2019. So I did the Boren IFLI program and ended it while working at a think tank in Jakarta. And then the pandemic happened in March 2020. So kind of to capitalize on what Dakota was saying, I was like, as soon as I came back from Boren, I wanted to be very insistent about being able to continue to use my Indonesian language skill. So every time I looked up a job, including my current one that I'm holding, it leveraged my Indonesian language experience. And so I worked at CSIS's Southeast Asia program as a research intern. And then following that, ended up working at Albright Stonebridge Group, where I also used my Indonesian to help with our clients in Indonesia, and being able to talk to Indonesian government officials in the language also helped pick up on some nuances that maybe I wouldn't have picked up if the language was just in English, or if the side conversations were in just in English. And that's kind of the cultural competency and nuances that I also use in my current job, which has been really exciting. So being able to go from the private sector and into the government, but still using Indonesian and still working on the Indo-Pacific, that is a specific choice that I made because I wanted to work on this region, and I wanted to see all these different perspectives and honestly different sectors, just to see like what my fit is, because I was trying to figure out like, okay, well, I know I like economics, but what does that mean? Like economic policy, economic security, national security. And so when I was thinking about how I've incorporated my language and cultural competencies, it's something that like helps me directly with my work, because a lot of the work that we do, especially on the ground, is people to people, and being able to speak the language just shows you going above and beyond, just kind of taking that extra step to be like, I understand, or at least I kind of understand like aspects of your culture. I want to be, I'm here and I want to be a resource for you, and also help think about our mission as the US government, and how we can support these Indo-Pacific initiatives and build this relationship. And back to you, Nicole.
Great, appreciate it. So now with the time that we have left, I'm going to get through as many of your questions as I can. And just in the interest of time, I might clump together a few questions that are of a similar type. And so I'm seeing a lot of questions right off the bat, you know, kind of aimed at the early career stages. A lot of interest in, you know, how do you get into a career in DC? How do you deal with the logistics of moving? How do you get that foot in the door? And how do you use and leverage the experience that you've gained as a Boren, and kind of looking at what experiences are really helpful to finding the specific career path or career goal that you're after. I'll just quickly have an interjection to say that for me personally, the Boren network was crucial. It really was the key. I went to a agricultural college in the middle of nowhere on the West Coast that doesn't have a lot of folks that come over to DC for careers. And then I chose a grad school program that was an area studies degree and had a cohort of 4, and of which none of them moved to DC. And so literally I emailed a peer in my Boren cohort and said, do you know anyone? Can I be friends with anyone? I'm moving to DC in a month and I literally know nobody. And so getting involved with the Boren community, plugging back in, is really where I made a lot of the crucial connections that have stayed with me up until today in my career. And so maybe to the rest of the panelists and the 3 of you, please just jump in on this question. Kind of addressing that early career uncertainty, what was helpful for you? How did you get your foot in the door in the first place? And please just jump in. It looks like JQ wanted to jump in, so maybe I'll call on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting my foot in the door, I was really lucky. I mean, the Boren Awards has, great guardrails for helping you find a job in government service. So I think it was mentioned earlier on that we had kind of an all hands Boren seminar where a bunch of the Boren awardees finished their study abroad programs and visited in DC to talk about, what kind of careers are out there. And then a lot of these government agencies, so DOT specifically, they are looking for people with that cultural nuance, like very recent cultural experiences. So we have recruiters there. And for me, I was really lucky in that there's a direct pipeline for the DoD, and they were looking for people with East Asia experience, people with language. And my niche was, I was focused primarily on economics. I made it a point in my cover letters and then also my resume to really focus on that functional expertise that I have, but then also to filter in a little bit of the, the cultural nuance of going to China, being in Peking University and being able to talk about the experiences that I had there and connecting it with current issues that were going on. So the trade war was big on my mind at that point in the world. So being able to talk about that and how my skill set would have potential to benefit the government. And that's kind of how I got my foot in the door.
Thanks so much. Camille or Dakota?
Yeah, so to talk a little bit more about what Nicole was saying, for example, honestly, I would say being able to be, I don't know how many people use Meta or Facebook anymore, but for me, I've joined a lot of the CLS alumni or like Boren alumni pages. Actually, 2 of my roommates are either CLS or Boren alum, specifically because I would like post like, we're looking for a roommate, and I didn't know where else to look. And so I just posted on those pages. And so really having that sense of community makes a huge difference, because a lot of the people you'll find in the community are very like, oh yeah, I'll pay it forward. Or I might not be an expert, but I know someone who I think is interested in this issue that you have. And I would say for getting your foot in the door, really what got me so far is this thing called like spaghetti connections, like maybe asking, even as an undergrad, I was like, do you like, based on my interests, after I had a quick like 20 or 30 minute coffee chat, I'd say, do you know anyone you think I should be talking to? Do you know if you have anyone who's really interested in my target area, for example? And so really just having a lot of those conversations is a huge, will help you along the way also for networking. Just being able to come to in-person like CLS events, like CLS Alumni Society conference is really great. Or even attending all the webinars like that you guys are doing right now. For Boren, I remember I had no idea how to use my Schedule A. I didn't know how to request a letter of certification. And so, or I didn't even know how to write a federal resume. So when I was applying for this job, I was like, where did I put that email with all those resources on how to write a federal resume? And so really the Boren community, CLS community, even myself, and I'm Nicole, and the other panelists, I'm sure we're all here to help for the kinds of questions that you guys have for being able to move ahead in your career.
Thanks, appreciate it. Dakota, did you want to jump in on this question?
Yeah, briefly, I would say that I think it's fair to say none of us knew what was going to happen. We all had goals, and then we all got to where we are now, even though we were not strictly in control of what happened. So it's nice to have aims, nice to have goals, and you can work towards those things. But just know that there is always going to be an element of uncertainty, and you're prepared for that.
Very true. Flexibility is key in a lot of what we do, both professionally and personally, I would say. Let's see, we've got a few minutes left, so I think I'll ask one more question before turning it back to our hosts. I'm seeing a couple of questions that are touching on maybe more of the policy side and kind of the policy and priorities. And so understanding that we're speaking in our personal capacities here, but how do you look at the Indo-Pacific region and begin picking up on either trends or prioritizing certain aspects of the relationships that you work on or that you learned more about while you were on your board? Anybody want to jump in on this one first? Or I will call on people. I'll give our panelists a little bit more time to think on this one, but personally, doing my foreign in Thailand gave me a really good footing for understanding what is going on in sometimes a part of the world that isn't as emphasized as some of the allies or partnerships in East Asia. And so really being able to prioritize ASEAN as an institution, being able to prioritize the Mekong subregion. I've really drawn on the experiences that I had abroad and as a grad student and as well. And I think that was helpful in kind of setting apart an area that not everybody comes into wanting to focus on. And so, both when you're applying for your board or writing your essay or you're on your year, really thinking, what can I contribute? What unique skills and interests do I have? And how can I leverage that for the greater US partnerships or US government service? And so it's very helpful to have an awareness of the broader strategies, the global trends, the interests of the US. But really do rely on you and your unique expertise, your unique perspectives, because that's something that's really valuable when you do step into a career, whether that is government or not. But being able to create new ideas or to emphasize areas that others might not have thought of. So, definitely feel encouraged to lean into those unique skills that you have and these unique interests and see how you can leverage them across the government. There are so many ways to do so. So maybe I'll see if any other panelists want to jump in on this one.
Yeah, just to echo what Nicole was saying, I think step one is getting informed about the region or getting to have a better idea of what you want out of what kind of programs do you like to work on? And then also how does that fit into kind of the administration's like grander strategy for the Indo-Pacific? There's so many different kinds of ways to do this, as you can tell by the representation here on this panel. For me in the US Department of Commerce, I've always been really interested in business, economic trends. And so one of my favorite things to look at when thinking more about the importance of this region is the ASEAN Matters for America, America Matters for ASEAN report. I think it's the East-West Center, US ASEAN Business Council, and I don't remember the third organization that helps with it. But it's really astounding to see how much of an impact the ASEAN nations have on our relationship and also what we can do for them. And so also kind of starting small and realizing that the Indo-Pacific is definitely not a monolith by any sense. And so when I first started, I was thinking a little bit more about what is my niche, what do I bring to the table, and so remembering that I speak Tagalog fluently, but I also speak Indonesian now, made me think a little bit more about, okay, maybe I'll focus on maritime Southeast Asia instead of like the Mekong region because I'm not as familiar with it. And so I started off small with that, and now, as I was mentioning earlier, my portfolio has now expanded to focusing on like Bangladesh or Nepal. And so I think being able to find your niche, oh my gosh, and then being able to expand from there is a good way to start.
Great, thanks. Maybe if JQ and Dakota want to jump in, we can do about 20 seconds each, and then I'll hand it off to our hosts for any closing remarks or thoughts from them.
Yeah, one thing I just mentioned is just as college students, really take advantage of all the resources you have at hand. So be it, student organizations, people who have, who have more of a passion towards a region, foreign service, but also your faculty members, your teachers. That's something I wish I did more. And I only did that right when I was looking for a job post-grad. I was able to find someone within our international relations office, and they were really open to talking about what opportunities were out there, how I can get more involved, what the resources they wish they could have used when they were, in my shoes. So they have so much more of a network than we could ever have at that point in our careers. So being able to leverage those resources at your universities or whichever education sites that you look at, I think there's just a lot of resources out there that you'd be surprised with.
Thanks. And one quick plug, I saw a question about paying for grad school. One really great way to do that is the FLAS program, FLAS. It is a language scholarship that will provide a stipend and pay for grad school. So, as a cohort interested in language, that's definitely a resource to look for and take advantage of. And Dakota, any closing thoughts from you before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, the region is a focus for our government. The region is a focus for business. There is incredible interest. You have basically a blank slate in front of you. Lean into the skills that you've spent the last year or decade developing. Make that a differentiator and use that to do something really awesome, because we need you to.
No better way to close it out from our panelists. Appreciate that. Great. Thanks so much, Dakota. Now I'll turn it back to Chase, and just want to thank the panelists for really great insights. Always happy to lend a hand and be associated with such great individuals. So thanks everyone for a really engaging panel tonight.
Yes, thank you all so much for being here. We really do enjoy all of your unique perspectives. Thank you for answering all of these questions. It really means a lot to us. So that just about wraps us all up. Again, big round of applause if we can for our panelists. I know we can't hear any of you, but clap your hands in spirit for us. Before you go, I do have a couple of just quick closing things to say. First, again, please do fill out that survey when you get a chance. I would be very, very glad to see some of your responses. Second, for those of you who are interested in applying for the Boren, applications are currently open. Please send your application packages by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard on January 24th for those applying for the fellowship, and 5 p.m. Eastern on January 31st for scholars. If you're interested in applying for the CLS program, applications have closed for now, but will be open again in the fall. That's about all for me. Thank you again so much for coming. We hope to see you at part 3 early next year.